They never thought I would actually go through with it. They were wrong. My name is Rachel, and 16 months before my wedding day, I booked the venue, sent the save the dates, and called my mother to share the date. She said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We'll be there." Those were her exact words. I remember because I wrote them down in the little journal I kept during our engagement. I was so happy that I underlined them twice. 11 months later, she called me back and told me to change the date. Tyler and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed. We met at a school where we both taught him in the science department, me in English, and on our first date he brought me a book he thought I'd like. I married him for that book. I also married him for about 10,000 other reasons. But that's where it started. He was thoughtful in a way that felt rare. The kind of man who remembered the small things and never made you feel like a burden for having feelings. When he got down on one knee in our apartment kitchen with flour on his hands because we'd been making pasta from scratch, I said yes before he finished the sentence. We chose April 12th, a Saturday, 16 months out. The venue was a restored farmhouse about 40 minutes outside the city, with string lights over the barn and a meadow where we could do the ceremony. It held 180 guests. We put down a deposit of $4,000 and signed a contract. The event coordinator, a woman named Sandra who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, told us we were getting the last available spring weekend and that we were very lucky. I felt lucky. I was 29 years old, marrying a good man, and my whole family was going to be there to watch it happen. I called my mother that same evening. I told her the date, the venue name, the approximate guest count. I told her I wanted her to help me choose my dress. She said she was so proud of me and that April 12th sounded absolutely perfect. My father got on the phone and told Tyler he was glad to have him in the family. My brother texted a string of champagne emojis. My sister-in-law, who had been married to my brother for 3 years and who I had always tried hard to like, sent a voice message saying she couldn't wait to celebrate us. Everything was fine. Everything was wonderful. For about 5 months. My sister-in-law turned 40 in April. Not April 12th. April 19th. 1 week after my wedding. But sometime in the late fall, she and my brother decided that a single day was not enough to mark this milestone, and they began planning what they called a destination celebration, a long weekend trip to Napa Valley. 5 days, 40 guests, a private wine tour, a chef's dinner, a spa day, the works. They sent a save the date in December, a beautiful one, with a watercolor illustration, and their names in gold foil. The dates were April 10th through 14th. April 10th through 14th. My wedding was April 12th. I told my brother the same day the card arrived. I said, "Did you look at the calendar before you booked this?" He said he and his wife had been planning it for a while, and that the dates worked best for the group they were inviting. I asked if he had noticed that his dates completely overlapped with my wedding weekend. He said, and I want to be very precise here, "We figured you'd understand. It's her 40th. You can move your date." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment before I said anything. I said, "I booked my venue 16 months ago. I cannot move my date. The venue is contracted. Tyler and I have already sent save the dates to 160 people. My brother said he was sure the venue would work with us if we explained the situation. I told him I had signed a contract, and that breaking it would cost us our entire deposit plus a cancellation fee. He said money was always a concern with me. I hung up. 3 days later, my mother called. She did not open with hello. She opened with, "I've been thinking about your brother's situation, and I really think you should consider moving your date. Your sister-in-law has been planning this for months. Her 40th only happens once." I told my mother the same things I had told my brother. The contract, the deposit, the 160 save the dates already sent, the venue that had no other available spring weekend. My mother said, "There's always a way if you want to find one." I said, "My wedding date was set first. By almost a year." She said, "This isn't a competition, Rachel." I said, "I agree, so why are you asking me to lose?" She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your brother and his wife are very hurt that you're being this way." I told her I was going to go and that I loved her, and I ended the call. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, and Tyler came in from the kitchen, took one look at my face, and sat down next to me without saying a word. After about 2 minutes, he said, "How bad?" I said, "Medium bad, possibly getting worse." He put his arm around me and said, "We're getting married on April 12th. I held on to that. Over the next 2 months, my parents called a total of 9 times about the date. Each call followed the same script. My sister-in-law's 40th. Once in a lifetime. Family should come together. Think of how it looks. You're being selfish, Rachel. You need to be the bigger person." By February, I had stopped picking up the calls and started letting them go to voicemail, then texting back that I was busy but that the date was not changing. My mother escalated. She sent an email, an actual email, formatted like a letter, in which she outlined all the reasons I was damaging the family by refusing to reschedule. She carbon copied my father, my brother, and my sister-in-law. She did not carbon copy me by accident. She wanted me to know who was watching. I forwarded the email to Tyler and to my Uncle David, who is my father's older brother and one of the few people in my family who had always been straight with me. Uncle David called me within the hour. He said, "I saw the email. This is not right. You hold your ground." I told him I intended to. He said, "I'll be at your wedding." Front row. I cried a little. He pretended not to notice. In March, things got quiet. The calls stopped. My mother replied to one of my texts with a brief okay when I asked if she had received the formal invitation. My father did not respond at all. I told myself this was progress. I told myself they had accepted it. I told Tyler I thought the worst was over. I was catastrophically wrong. 4 weeks before the wedding, Sandra from the venue called my cell phone. She sounded uncomfortable in a way that experienced event coordinators are not supposed to sound. She said, "Rachel, I wanted to reach out directly because we received a call yesterday asking about canceling your April 12th booking." I felt the floor shift under me. I said, "What?" She said someone had called claiming to be handling the booking on my behalf and asked what the cancellation process would be and what fees might be waived given the circumstances. Sandra said they had not proceeded with anything, that the contract was in my name and Tyler's, and that nothing could be altered without written authorization from both of us. She said she just wanted to make sure I was aware. I said, "Who called?" Sandra hesitated. She said the caller had given a name. The name was my mother's. I sat very still for a long time after that call ended. Then I called Tyler. I told him what Sandra had said. There was silence on his end for about 4 seconds, which is a long time for Tyler, and then he said, very quietly, "She tried to cancel our venue." Not a question. A statement. I said yes. He said, "Okay. We need to document everything." He was already thinking ahead. That was the moment I understood exactly what kind of fight this was going to be. There was something else we needed to address. When my grandmother passed away 2 years earlier, she left behind a trust. She had been careful with money her whole life and careful with her love. But she had been clear in her will. Each of her grandchildren was to receive funds from the trust when they married, to help with the cost of building a life. My share was designated at $78,000. It was meant to cover the wedding and help with a down payment on a house. My parents were listed as trustees, responsible for distributing the funds to me upon my marriage. In late March, Tyler and I sat down to finalize our budget. I had been drawing from savings to cover vendor deposits and had expected the trust disbursement to come through within the next few weeks. I called my father and asked about the timeline. He said he would look into it. I called again 4 days later. He said there had been some administrative delays. I called a third time, and he did not answer. I reached out to the attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate, a man named Robert who had an office downtown and had known my grandmother for 30 years. I asked him whether there was any reason the trust disbursement might be delayed. He asked me some questions. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would need to review some documents and would get back to me. He called back in 2 days. He said there had been a withdrawal from the trust, a substantial one. Approximately $65,000 had been moved out of the account in January, reclassified under a provision my parents had apparently interpreted as covering family event expenses. Robert said the provision was almost certainly being misapplied. He said he needed to look more closely at the language, but that what he was seeing concerned him. $65,000. January. The same month my sister-in-law sent out her Napa Valley save the dates. I told Tyler that night. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and I laid it out piece by piece: the venue call, the attempted cancellation, the trust withdrawal, the timeline. Tyler listened to all of it without interrupting me. When I finished, he folded his hands on the table and said, "We need a lawyer." I said I already had Robert's number pulled up on my phone. Tyler said, "Good. Call him tomorrow. Tonight we get married in 26 days and nothing is going to stop that." I looked at him across the table and thought about the book he'd brought on our first date, and I thought about the flower on his hands when he proposed, and I thought about how lucky I was that when the people who were supposed to protect me decided not to, I had someone sitting next to me who would not waver. I said, "Nothing is going to stop it." He said, "Exactly." My parents confirmed 3 weeks before the wedding that they would not be attending. My mother sent a text. It said, "We hope you understand why we can't be there. We love you, but this decision has consequences for the whole family." I read it twice, put my phone face down on the counter, and went to finish addressing the seating chart. My brother sent a similar message, adding that he hoped I would reflect on the position I had put everyone in. My sister-in-law said nothing at all, which was almost more offensive. Uncle David called that evening to check on me. I told him what had happened. He said, "Every person at that wedding is choosing to be there. That's more than you can say for people who come out of obligation." I thought about that for a long time. We got married on April 12th. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of spring day that looks like someone planned it. I got dressed in a suite at a small inn nearby with my 2 best friends and my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who had called me the week before and said she was coming regardless of what anyone else decided. She helped me button the back of my dress, and she did not cry, but her eyes were very bright, and she kept squeezing my hands. The ceremony was in the meadow. The string lights were on even in the daytime because Tyler had asked Sandra if we could keep them lit, and Sandra had said of course. There were 172 guests in those chairs. Not my parents. Not my brother and sister-in-law, who were, at that exact hour, approximately 4 hours into a wine tour in Napa, but 172 other people who had gotten in their cars or on planes to be in that meadow on that morning. Uncle David walked me down the aisle. I had not planned that. When the processional music started and my father was not there, Uncle David had simply appeared at my side, offered me his arm, and said quietly, "Ready?" That was it. No speech, no ceremony within the ceremony. Just his arm, and that one word. I held on and I walked. Tyler was standing at the end of the aisle, and when he saw me, his face did something that I am not going to try to describe because I don't think I can do it justice. He had been steady through all of it, every phone call, every difficult night, every moment I had wondered whether the cost was too high, and in that moment, standing there waiting for me, he looked like all of that steadiness had been worth something. We said our vows. The officiant was a friend of Tyler's from college, who had gotten ordained for the occasion, and who knew us well enough to make people laugh twice and cry once. We exchanged rings, we kissed. 172 people stood up and made enough noise to carry across the meadow and probably into the next county. At the reception, after dinner, Tyler stood up. He hadn't told me he was going to do this. I found out the same moment everyone else did, when he pushed back his chair and picked up his glass, and the room began to quiet. He stood there for a moment and looked out at the tables at my aunt with her bright eyes, at Uncle David already leaning forward in his chair, at our friends and colleagues and cousins and neighbors, at the 2 chairs near the front that had been set and were empty, and then he spoke. He said he wanted to say something about what it means to choose someone. He said choosing isn't just what you do on the good days, when it's easy and uncomplicated and everyone is cheering. Choosing is what you do when things get hard and the people you expected to show up don't, and you have to decide whether to let that redefine your story or to write a different one. He said Rachel had never once, in the entire past year, let anyone take that pen from her hand. He said she was the strongest person he had ever known, and that he was proud to spend his life choosing her every single day without exception. The room was completely silent. Then Uncle David started clapping, and the whole room came up with him. I was not going to cry. I had decided that. But I looked at Tyler standing there and I thought about my mother's text on the counter, and my father's unanswered calls, and the empty chairs 2 tables away. And something cracked open in my chest that was not grief exactly, but was something adjacent to it. A kind of grief for the version of this day I had originally imagined. The one where my father walked me down the aisle and my mother cried in the front row, and everything was uncomplicated. That version was gone. It had been taken from me piece by piece over 16 months, and now it was simply not coming back. But what I had instead, Tyler and the string lights and 172 people on their feet, was real. I let myself cry for about 30 seconds. Then I picked up my glass and I toasted my husband. The legal process began the following week. Robert had continued reviewing the trust documents throughout the wedding planning and had reached a clear conclusion. The withdrawal my parents had made did not fall under any legitimate provision of my grandmother's trust. The language regarding family event expenses was narrow, specific, and had been intended to cover incidental costs related to the distribution process itself, legal fees, administrative expenses. It absolutely did not authorize a $65,000 transfer to fund a private Napa Valley birthday celebration. Robert filed a formal demand for accounting. My parents retained their own attorney. For the next 3 months, there was a back and forth of letters and documentation requests and counter-arguments that I tried my best to follow and that Tyler tracked in a spreadsheet with the same methodical focus he brought to everything. My parents' attorney argued that the provision was ambiguous and that my parents had acted in good faith as trustees. Robert argued that the withdrawal was a clear breach of fiduciary duty and that the funds needed to be returned to the trust in full plus interest, and that the full amount designated for my disbursement, $78,000, needed to be released immediately. We also discovered during the discovery process that the $65,000 had not been the only irregularity. There had been 2 smaller withdrawals in the preceding year, totaling another $11,000, attributed to vague line items that Robert said were impossible to verify. The full amount in question came to just over $94,000, plus the withheld disbursement, plus interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal. We went to mediation in August. I had never been to mediation before. The room was smaller than I expected, a conference room in a downtown office building with a long table and chairs that were too comfortable for how uncomfortable everything felt. My parents sat across from me and Tyler. My mother looked tired in a way she hadn't the last time I'd seen her. My father looked at the table more than he looked at me. Their attorney was a small man in a gray suit who spoke very precisely and said very little. Robert sat beside me and had a folder of documents that he had color-coded with tabs. The mediator was a woman named Patricia, who had the particular brand of calm that you only develop after watching families tear themselves apart over money for 20-plus years. She laid out the process. She explained that the goal was resolution. She looked at all of us in turn with an expression that communicated she had seen worse and expected better. The mediation took 6 hours. At the end of it, my parents agreed to repay the full amount of the unauthorized withdrawals, $94,000 plus applicable interest, bringing the total to just under $112,000. They also agreed to release the full trust disbursement owed to me, $78,000, immediately. Legal fees and mediation costs were split and added to their portion. The total my parents were required to pay, between restitution and fees, was $131,000. My mother cried during the final session. Not at me. She looked at the table when she cried. My father sat very still with his jaw tight and his hands flat on the table in front of him, and he said nothing. I thought about the text she had sent me. "We love you, but this decision has consequences for the whole family." I thought about how she had been right about consequences. She just had not been right about whose. We walked out of that building in the late afternoon with the settlement paperwork signed. Tyler held my hand on the sidewalk and said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said, "I think I will be." He said that was good enough. We went and had dinner at a restaurant where we had gone on one of our early dates, and we didn't talk about my parents at all. We talked about the students we had that year, and a hike we were planning for October, and whether we should repaint the second bedroom. It was the most normal evening I had had in months, and I drank 2 glasses of wine, and laughed at something Tyler said, and thought about how much of my energy I had spent in the last year, on people who had made themselves very clear. Tyler and I bought a house in October with part of the disbursement. It had 3 bedrooms and a back porch, and a garden that the previous owners had left in reasonable shape. Uncle David came over the first weekend and helped Tyler build shelves in the garage, and I made lunch for both of them, and it was one of the quieter and more contented days I could remember having. My brother called once in November. He said he wanted to talk. I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message twice. He said he thought things had gone too far, and that he hoped we could find our way back to being a family. He said his wife was sorry, though he didn't say what specifically she was sorry for. He said Mom and Dad were struggling, and that it would mean a lot if I would reach out to them. I didn't call back. Not because I had no feelings about it. I had many feelings about it. But I had spent a long time waiting for acknowledgement that never arrived in the form I needed. And I had learned something about myself through all of this, which was that my willingness to absorb other people's failures had a limit. I had found that limit. I intended to respect it. In March, Tyler and I found out we were expecting. We told Uncle David first. He became emotional in a way that was very out of character for him, and then became embarrassed about becoming emotional, which made both of us laugh. We told my aunt, the one who had helped button my dress. We told our friends. We told Tyler's family, who celebrated with a volume and enthusiasm that filled an entire restaurant and spilled out onto the sidewalk. My mother found out through my aunt. She texted me 2 days later. She said, "I heard the news. I'd love to have a relationship with my grandchild. I hope we can talk." She did not say she was sorry. She did not acknowledge the trust, or the venue call, or the empty chairs, or the text she had sent about consequences. She said she wanted a relationship with my grandchild in the same breath as she expressed a hope that we could talk, as if those 2 things were a trade she was entitled to propose. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and looked out the window for a long time. Tyler came in and I showed him the text. He read it and put the phone down and looked at me. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. He just waited. I said, "She still hasn't said she's sorry." He said, "I know." I said, "Not for any of it. Not for trying to cancel the venue. Not for the money. Not for the empty chairs." He said, "I know." I thought about my grandmother, who had worked carefully and quietly her whole life to leave something for the people who came after her. I thought about what she would have made of how it had been handled. I thought about my wedding day and Uncle David appearing at my side with his arm out and that one word, and Tyler at the end of the aisle with that expression on his face, and 172 people on their feet in a meadow at the end of April. I thought about what it had cost me to get there and what it had given me. I picked up my phone. I typed back one sentence. I said, "When you're ready to have an honest conversation about everything that happened, I'm open to it. Until then, I need you to respect this boundary." She did not reply. My father texted a week later. He said he knew things had been hard and that he hoped I was well. He said he would like to meet the baby when the time came. He said, "I want to be a grandfather." I thought about what it means to want something you haven't earned. I did not respond. Our daughter was born on a Thursday in November, just after 6 in the morning, when the sky outside the hospital window was doing something extraordinary with the light. Tyler was beside me for all of it, and he held her first, and when he brought her over to me, he was crying in a way he would definitely not want me to describe, so I will only say that it was the second time in my life I had seen his face do something I couldn't put into words. We named her after my grandmother. Uncle David arrived at the hospital within 2 hours with a stuffed elephant and a container of soup he had made that morning, and absolutely red eyes he refused to acknowledge. My aunt came that afternoon. Our friends came and went in shifts across the first 2 days. The room was full of people who had chosen to be there. It was full of people who had made that choice across the last 2 years and kept making it. The baby slept in my arms on that first night, in the quiet after everyone had gone, and I sat with her in the dark, and I thought about everything that had happened since the evening Tyler proposed in our kitchen with flour on his hands. I thought about how the year leading up to our wedding had hollowed something out of me that had not entirely grown back yet, and about how the year following it had been the process of figuring out who I was on the other side of that. I was someone who had held a line when it would have been easier to give in. I was someone whose husband had stood up in a room of 172 people and told the truth about who she was. I was someone who had learned, slowly and at real cost, that loving your family and refusing to be diminished by them are not opposing forces. They can exist together. They have to. My daughter shifted in my arms and made a small sound, and I looked down at her and I thought, she will never spend one day of her life wondering whether she is worth showing up for. That, I had decided, was where the story was going. And no one, not my mother with her texts, not my father with his unanswered calls, not my brother with his voicemails, not my sister-in-law with her 40th birthday and her Napa Valley wine tour was going to write the ending, but me.